Good evening. My name is Sarah Moore Fitzgerald, and I am the course director for the MA in Creative Writing at the University of Limerick, which is based in the Department of English, Irish and Communication. Welcome to University Literature Night. Several institutions are collaborating on this international cultural event. There are the universities of A Coruña in Spain, Rennes and Vannes in France, Flensburg in Germany, Hamar in Norway, Paphos in Cyprus, Alexandroupoli in Greece, Kremenchuk in Ukraine, and Tbilisi in Georgia, with which we have formed the Emerge Alliance of European universities. We are all united by common values: resilience, sustainability, and inclusion. And we want to emphasise the quality of our students' education and support the development of the regions in which we operate. Literature as an art form that knows no boundaries helps us in this endeavour. Today, in these European cities, on the grounds of their universities, as well as here at the University of Limerick, University Night of Literature takes place. I'm going to read you an excerpt from a novel by American author Elizabeth Strout. Elizabeth writes about ordinary people and their ordinary lives, and she lets her characters wander through her novels. She's one of my absolute favourite authors, and it's the way she writes makes us feel as if we're watching characters' lives from different angles. She is interested in human relationships, marital, parental, friendship, and interpersonal communication in what is said, but especially in what is left unsaid. The novel Tell Me Everything connects the grumpy Olive Kitteridge, who I think is just a fantastic character, a lawyer, Bob Burgess, also wonderful, and writer Lucy Barton, fully realised and relatable characters. While Bob deals with his legal case and comes to terms with old age, Olive and Lucy meet and talk. Tell Me Everything by Elizabeth Strout. This is the story of Bob Burgess, a tall, heavy-set man who lives in the town of Crosby, Maine, and he is 65 years old at the time that we are speaking of him. Bob has a big heart, but he does not know that about himself. Like many of us, he does not know himself as well as he assumes to, and he would never believe he had anything worthy in his life to document. But he does. We all do. Bob had been a lawyer in New York City for many years in his younger days, but nobody held this against him, probably because he had grown up in Shirley Falls, 45 minutes away. He had returned to Maine almost 15 years ago when he married Margaret. He still took occasional criminal cases in Shirley Falls and was known to keep an office there, though he had mostly retired by now. And also, people spoke of this quietly, Bob had suffered a tragedy in childhood. He had been playing with the gear shift of the family car, and it had rolled down the hill of the Burgesses' driveway. People in town understood that the car, and therefore Bob, had killed Bob's father, who was checking on their mailbox there. Olive Kitteridge, who was 90 years old and living in the retirement community called the Maple Tree Apartments, knew this about Bob Burgess, and she had always liked him. She thought he had a quiet sadness about him, most likely from this early misfortune. Olive did not particularly care for Bob's wife, Margaret. This was because Margaret was a minister, and Olive did not like ministers, except for Cookie, who had married her to her first husband, Henry. Wonderful man, Reverend Daniel Cook, and wonderful man, Henry Kitteridge. The pandemic had been hard for Olive Kitteridge, hard for everyone really, but Olive had endured it day after day in her little apartment in this retirement community. Yet when they stopped allowing people to eat in the dining room and started bringing their food to them instead, she thought she would go absolutely batty. By the end of that first year, though, with her vaccinations and then later a booster, she was able to get out a bit more. Someone might drive her into town or take her down by the water. But the real problem was that during the pandemic, Olive's best friend, Isabel Goodrow, who lived 2 doors down from her, had taken a bad fall and, of all the awful things that could have happened, had been moved over the bridge to the nursing home part of the place. Now, Olive went to visit Isabel every day, reading her the newspaper from front to back, But it had been hard, and it still was. Out on the end of the point of Crosby, high up on a cliff that looked out over the mostly roiling waters of the Atlantic Ocean, lived a woman named Lucy Barton, who had arrived with her ex-husband William 2 years before, escaping New York City during the pandemic, and they had ended up staying in town. There were mixed feelings about this. The natural reticence towards New Yorkers was part of it, but also housing prices in Crosby had gone through the roof exactly because of folks like this Lucy Barton, who had decided to stay in town, and anyone from Maine who had been hoping to move into a nicer house now found that they could not afford one. Lucy Barton had grown up in a small town in Illinois and had lived in New York City her whole adult life. She had never even been a summer person in Maine before arriving here with her ex-husband. Also, Lucy Barton was a fiction writer, and that made people have different feelings. Mostly, they would have preferred her to go back to New York, but nobody seemed to have anything bad to say about her. And except for her walks along the river with her friend Bob Burgess, she was rarely seen, although she was sometimes observed going through the back door that led up to the little office space she rented above the bookstore. A thought had taken hold of Olive Kitteridge on one of these days in October, and she pondered it for almost a week before she called Bob Burgess. "I have a story to tell that writer Lucy Barton. I wish you would have her come visit me." The story was one that Olive had been reflecting on with more and more frequency, and she thought, as people often do, that if her story could be told to a writer, maybe it could be used in a book one day. Olive did not know if Lucy was a famous writer or not quite a famous writer, but she decided it did not matter. The library always had a long wait list for Lucy's books, so Olive had ordered them from the bookstore instead, and she read through them, and something made her think that this Lucy might like, or could possibly use, the story Olive had to tell. At 5 minutes before 10, there was a light knock on the door that faced the hallway, and Olive yelled out, "Come in!" In stepped a small woman who looked meek and mousy. Olive could not stand meek and mousy-looking people. The woman said, "I'm sorry I'm early. I'm always early. I can't seem to help it." "That's fine. I hate people who are late. Sit down," Olive said, and she nodded towards the small couch against the wall across from her. Lucy Barton came in and sat down. She was wearing a blue and black plaid coat that went to her knees and jeans that Olive thought were too tight for a woman of her age. Lucy was 66. Olive had looked it up. "Well, Lucy, how are you liking our little town of Crosby?" "It's quite a change," Lucy Barton said. "Well, it's not New York, if that's what you mean." Lucy looked around the room and then said, "I guess that is what I mean." Olive continued to watch her. For a few moments there was only the ticking of the grandfather clock and the slight whirring sound of the refrigerator in the alcove kitchen. "Please, tell me the story." Something in Olive relaxed. She said, "Okay, but now I don't know if it's worth telling." "Well, tell me anyway," Lucy said. The story was this. Olive's mother had been the daughter of a farmer in a little town in Maine called West Annette, about an hour away from Crosby, and, oh, by the way, Olive did not like her mother, but that was probably irrelevant. "Why didn't you like her?" Lucy asked, and Olive thought about it and said, "I suppose because she didn't like me." Lucy nodded. "I was 5 years old by the time my little sister was born, and I have a memory, who knows if it's true, of having asked my mother why I didn't have any brothers or sisters, and she had looked at me and said, 'After you, we wouldn't dare have another child after you.' But then they did." "Why would she say that? What was so wrong with you as a little kid?" Lucy asked. "Well, for one thing, I didn't like to cuddle, and oh, Mother just loved Isa, who would cuddle with her. Mother loved to cuddle, and apparently I did not." "Isa, your sister, great name. Okay, go on." Lucy picked something off her jeans. "So, Olive's mother, what was her name?" Lucy interrupted, looking over at Olive, and Olive said that her mother's name was Sarah. So, Sarah was raised on this small farm in the town of West Annette. She was very short and a cheerful person, and pretty. "I have never been pretty," Olive added. Lucy just sat watching her, and Olive had to look out the window. "Go on," Lucy said quietly. At the end of the first year, Olive's mother had taken a job waitressing at a resort farther down the coast. She had lived at the resort while working there, and she had fallen in love with the son of the woman who owned the resort. "Are you listening?" Olive asked. Lucy said that she was. Money. His mother had money, came from money. Don't know what had happened to the father, dead, I think. But the point was that Olive's mother, Sarah, had really fallen in love with this fellow. His name was Stephen Turner, and as far as Olive knew, this fellow loved her back. Stephen's mother also owned a resort in Florida, so although Olive's mother went back to Gorham Normal School, she suddenly quit at the end of the first semester and went down to Florida to work in this Mrs. Turner's resort. Your mother told you this? Lucy asked. She did. Go on. And by the time she came back to Maine, was the fellow there in Florida? Lucy asked, and Olive said, oh yes, Stephen was there. But by the time Sarah came back, she and Stephen were no longer a couple. Mrs. Turner had decided that Sarah was not sophisticated enough for her son, so she had broken them up in Florida. Stephen was going to be a doctor, which meant that Sarah was simply not good enough for him, having come from just a poor, small farm. Wait, you heard all this from your mother? Lucy asked. She was leaning slightly forward. Well, yes, Mother told me all this when I was a young girl, 12 or so. I don't know. But Mother told me. Only one time, though. I don't remember her ever mentioning it again. Go on, Lucy said. Sarah went back to normal school in Maine, and 3 months later she met Olive's father at a barn dance. He was sitting on the end of a bench because he couldn't socialise, so he stuck himself on the end of the bench, and Mother started talking to him, and 2 months after that, they got married. Olive's mother became a teacher. Her first job was a one-room schoolhouse. And Olive's father, who had never finished high school, went to work in a canning factory. He lost his job during the Depression, and he could not pay for groceries. Where? Lucy asked quietly. Where did he do this? In the kitchen. He was in the kitchen when Mother got home from teaching. Brain stuff splattered all over the ceiling. Whoa, Lucy said very quietly. But that's not part of the story. Go on with the story, Lucy said. We don't know if that's part of the story or not. Olive felt surprised by that, but she continued. So when my mother died 3 years after my father did... What did she die of? Lucy asked. Brain tumour. Olive squinted across the room and said musingly. Yes, she died. And in her handbag, Olive shifted slightly in her chair and leaned forward. In her handbag, when I went through it, I found a tattered old clipping. It was not in her wallet, but slipped into a little pocket on the inside of her handbag that zipped shut. A newspaper clipping. Now back then, at that time, when someone of so-called importance came to town, there would be a silly little newspaper article about it, and this clipping was dated from back when Mother would have been married about 7 years and already had her 2 daughters. And the clipping was this. A small newspaper article in the Shirley Falls Journal with a photograph saying that Dr. Stephen Turner, son of blah blah and the late blah blah Mr. Turner, and his wife Ruth had come to town with their daughters. Stephen Turner was a doctor in Boston. His wife Ruth was the daughter of some hoity-toity in the Boston area, and they also had 2 very small girls who were also in the photograph. The girls' names were Olive and Isa. Olive waited. Then Lucy said, Oh my God, and Olive nodded her head. Lucy began tapping her knees together, and she looked around the room, her hands on the sofa. Oh my God, she repeated, looking at Olive now, and again Olive gave a small nod. Aye, Olive said. So your mother kept that clipping her whole life? She did. And his kids had the same names as you and your sister? That's right. Lucy shook her head slowly. So your mother and Stephen Turner must have spoken of the names they wanted to call their kids. Well, I did wonder about that, Olive said. You should wonder about that, Lucy sat forward. It couldn't possibly be a coincidence. The names are too unique. One of Lucy's hands moved as she said slowly, with a sense of wonder. They talked with each other about what to name their kids, and of course Ruth, the man's wife, never knew that. No woman would name her kids the same names that her husband had planned to name his children with a previous girlfriend. Well, this is what I thought. Lucy let out a huge sigh and said, But it's a sad story, carrying that clipping with her all her life. She shook her head and said, Jesus Christ, all these unrecorded lives, and people just live them. Then she looked at Olive. and said sorry for swearing. Phooey, swear all you want, Olive added. Well, that's the story. I always wanted to tell someone, but for whatever reasons, I never did. Lucy said contemplatively, I wonder how many people in long marriages live with ghosts beside them. I keep thinking these days about all these people, and people we don't even know, and their lives are unrecorded. But what does anyone's life mean?